The Baltimore Ravens finally got some key cap space after some big moves were, in a way, finalized. We talk about that, the Ravens OTA attendance early on sending a message, and so much more coming up on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher, Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for being here today on this Monday, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. We're free and available for you on all podcasting platforms. So if you're here with us in video form on YouTube, you can like and subscribe to the channel. If you're here with us in audio form, you can follow along and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. We are 5 days a week here on Locked On Ravens, Monday through Friday. We also sometimes have bonus episodes on the weekend. We go live after every single Ravens game and every piece of Ravens big news. So thank you out there to all the everydayers, the first-time listeners, and if you're somewhere in the middle over there, thank you as well. Another week of Baltimore Ravens football talk here on the show, and for me, it's exciting because, again, we're just checking off those boxes and, talk about the free agency, start of free agency. Then you talk about the draft, and then you get to rookie mini camp. And now we are at the organized team activity. So the Ravens will have an organized team activity tomorrow on June 3rd, and then they will have Wednesday off, and June 5 through 6, Thursday and Friday, they will have OTAs. So 3 days of OTAs for the Ravens this week, but none today. But that doesn't mean there's nothing to talk about today, because this is actually a pretty significant date. The Ravens finally getting some key cap space, so we'll talk about that in the first part of the show. We'll also dive into the Ravens OTA attendance early, sending some messages, and then we'll get into how it's body transformation season for the Baltimore Ravens right now. So let's get into it here. This is a big day because it is June 2nd, which does mean that Baltimore is going to get some cap space today. 11 teams are set to gain some cap room on June 2nd, and this coming from Over the Cap. And so June 1st officially marks the final day of the NFL calendar, where any future bonus money accelerates into the 2025 league year if a player is cut or traded. So today, the rules now allow a team to defer all of that acceleration to 2026 if they move on from a player. So that's big in terms of maybe future transactions the Ravens could make. But today also marks the day where the NFL will officially process those post-June 1 designations that were made earlier in the season. So the Ravens are set to receive $6.3 million, and obviously a couple of big moves. I mean, they've already technically happened, but they are now becoming more final, with the Ravens gaining the money back from Marcus Williams and Justin Tucker. So the Ravens, they will get, again, that $6.3 million. How that ends up being split up, which, again, Tucker was released a lot later than Marcus Williams was. The Ravens and Marcus agreed to a revised contract that would help out Baltimore both last year, during the year, and this year as well. They will get $2.1 million for Marcus Williams, $4.2 million for Justin Tucker, and then actually they'll get $1.255 million for Michael Pierce's retirement. This coming from Brian McFarland, Ravens salary cap, who does a phenomenal job with all things Ravens salary cap, and we've had him on the show multiple times, and he knows his stuff. Now, Brian also notes that each of those will be offset by $960,000 for their Rule of 51 replacement. So the net cap space received will be $4.675 million. But the Ravens also had a grievance from Tyus Bowser that was taken away from him. So that money will officially be added back on. And it is, I believe, now reflected, Brian says, in the Ravens salary cap sheet. So they actually got that $1.8 million back. That $1.8 million credit is now been posted by the NFLPA, according to Brian. So essentially a post-June 1st cut, just to kind of contextualize it in the words of Brian here. Brian says, quote, it's a decision of one, either taking all the dead money this year, costing them an additional $445,000 in cap space, but with no dead money push into 2026, or you use the post-June 1 designation and you create $4.2 million in 2025, but also you push $4.645 in dead money onto the 2026 cap. This was in the context of Justin Tucker. So essentially it is, you are taking on the dead money hit the same way, essentially, right? But you're either taking it all in 1 year, that year, or you are splitting it up into multiple years. The Ravens, when they did this post-June 1 for Justin Tucker, they decided to split that dead money up into 2 seasons instead of having that hit all come onto their cap this year, but not having any more on their cap in 2026. So again, it's just a preference. And for Baltimore and all teams across the league, we're only allowed to have 2 post-June 1 designations. So they obviously used them on Marcus Williams and Justin Tucker. And for me, the other big part of this is you also have to factor in a lot of other things, because just because the Ravens have gained back this space does not mean that the Ravens are, 1, done making moves, which we'll get to, and 2, it's not like they don't have anything else to account for, because you obviously have to account for things like injured reserve, physically unable to perform list, the practice squad. Mike Green has not signed his contract yet, so that will eat into this cap space. So the Ravens right now have, with all this being processed, they have about $22 million, anywhere from $20 to $22 million in cap space at the moment. But with all of the other stuff being factored in, including Mike Green's eventual contract, Brian says it will take it down to around $18.1 million, and then notes the future expenses like the things I just talked about. Those will all start counting in September, but Brian has noted that once all that actually does take in effect, the Ravens will have about $5 million in effective, which Brian then classifies as usable, cap space. So what are some ways to free up more money? You talk about extensions, restructures, the things we've been talking about all offseason. So Lamar Jackson obviously comes to the front of my mind when it comes to that. Derrick Henry's extension done. Marlon Humphrey did a max restructure. You could look to extend some other guys, maybe an Isaiah Likely, a Travis Jones, maybe an Afe Owe gets a deal. You could look to a Kyle Hamilton or Tyler Linderbaum, but, you're really trying to, if you want to make cap space for this season, and obviously some future years as well, you want to try to get those higher cap hits signed, 2 extensions, probably backload those deals. You can maneuver the cap, and we know Eric DeCosta and this Ravens organization is very good at doing so. So again, there are a lot of moving parts here, but we've been waiting for this for a while here, where it's like, all right, post-June 1 cuts, post-June 1 cuts. We talk about it all offseason. Well, we are now in the post-June 1 era, and that's a really big deal. So the Ravens, and Jeff Zrebiec kind of notes this as, the move was happening back in March. But for those that don't remember the Marcus Williams situation, the Ravens got $9.9 million in savings when they altered his deal back in January, and then they'll get that $2.1 million back. Well, now it's already back, but so they split that up. They already got the $9.9 million. Now they have cashed in, I guess, for lack of better terms, on that other $2+ million. So again, 2.1 for Marcus Williams and 4.2 for Justin Tucker makes a grand total of $6.3 million. But how could they use that space? Well, the Ravens roster right now is pretty much set. I would say really the only area on the roster I could see them trying to take a swing at is that safety position to replace Ardarius Washington. And who knows if Ardarius will be back this season or not. John Harbaugh and Ardarius seem decently confident in it, but we don't know at the time of this recording whether he'll be back or not. We still got a long way to go. Ardarius just had surgery on that torn Achilles. Maybe if a guy gets cut at a position, veteran inside linebacker, maybe. I wouldn't really expect them to make another move there. Maybe a guard gets cut, but that's all stuff that's going to be a little bit further down the line, in my opinion. You could go after Jalen Ramsey, for example, as maybe a trade, but I would expect the Ravens roster to stay pretty similar, but they always like to have space, as Brian notes, some of those future expenses, but also, if you do need to sign players based off of if you go through a lot of injuries, and knock on wood, that does not happen, but if they do go through injuries, they're going to have to sign some guys. Maybe they want to make a trade in season, and maybe a position is not working out, or they really need to add someone at a certain spot, and they have some leftover money for that as well. So there are all different types of reasons, but Baltimore finally getting back that cap space for Marcus Williams and Justin Tucker. And, they have a lot of other avenues to try to clear up more if they so choose. I'd personally like to see one or two more extensions happen before the season starts. Lamar Jackson being that big one that can, I think, help all parties there. It feels like that deal is going to come down the pipeline one way or the other. You're not going to let Lamar's cap number get to $70+ million next season. So there's that one. But then it is the Isaiah Likely's, the Travis Joneses, the Odafe Oweh's, the Tyler Linderbaums and Kyle Hamilton's, then, down the line and get to start thinking about other guys as well. What does Zay Flowers look like, Rashod Bateman, etc. So plenty of other avenues and plenty of other moves the Ravens could make. But coming up in the second part of the show, we'll talk about some OTAs, kind of dive into what happened last week, as well as talk about how the Ravens' early attendance, it sends a message, and it's a message that a lot of people are hearing loud and clear. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot coming up on the show. First, the show is brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. And LinkedIn has helped me with so many things over the course of my life, and there are so many stories about it helping so many different people. LinkedIn makes it so easy to post your job for free, share it with your networking at qualified candidates, all in one place. And LinkedIn has so many features that can help you out, from writing job descriptions and also getting your job in front of the right people with deep and important candidate insights. And a pro tip, you can add that hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture, and that will double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. So you can post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Again, post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Back here on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher here with you on this Monday, another week of Ravens talk. We are embarking on, as we always do here on Locked On Ravens. This is episode 1521 consecutively here on the show. Started us up in 2019 and have not looked back. It's been incredible going through the ups and the downs, although, look, the ups are a lot more fun than the downs with this team. But it's been awesome covering them here for so long on this show, and I can't wait to continue for many, 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 many more years to come. But let's talk about OTAs. OTAs kicked off for Baltimore last week, as I mentioned at the top of the show. They will have 3 more OTAs today. Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday will be the 3. They had a lot of really positive turnout over the course of week 1, and that included Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Roquan Smith, Marlon Humphrey. In fact, the only players that were not there for Baltimore, it was Daniel Falele, who was dealing with some physical things, according to John Harbaugh, and Harbaugh said he'll be back soon. Chidobe Awuzie, who John Harbaugh said was sick, and then Kyle Van Noy and Jake Hummel. Emory Jones also didn't practice. He was there. He's dealing with the shoulder labrum injury, and it wasn't expected he was going to practice anyway. Other than that, everybody was there. Everybody was participating. I mean, I guess if Ardarius Washington also falls into the injured category, but I mean, man, you talk about a good turnout, and there are a lot of teams across the league that, didn't see nearly as good. A lot of teams didn't see nearly as good as a turnout as the Ravens did. And, you heard from John Harbaugh, Isaiah Likely, Odafe Oweh. I mean, this sends a huge message. These guys want to work together. They want to get better. They want to get as much time in with the coaches as they can. And I'll stay firm on it, like for a Van Noy, for a Hummel, etc. Look, it's tough, really, when you're some of the only guys missing OTAs, but they are voluntary. If this was mandatory minicamp and those guys weren't there, we'd be having a different conversation. Again, my preference is everybody shows up. I would love that if all 90 guys, everybody on the team showed up. But voluntary is voluntary. If you want to show up, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to. And the fact that, look, the majority of these guys did show up shows just how dedicated they are. But that doesn't mean that, for example, Kyle Van Noy isn't dedicated. I don't want to have that narrative spread about Kyle or anybody else, a Hummel who wasn't there. Like, these guys are going through their offseason routine, and guys do come and go sometimes during OTAs. Like, there's no guarantee that everybody's there for every single OTA. It does fluctuate at times. Now, not all the time, but that is something that can happen. So, the message to me is that these guys want to win and they're not satisfied. You heard it off Owe send that message, which, really, I think resonated with me, where the Ravens are tired of finishing where they don't deserve to finish in their mind and where they don't want to finish, where they shouldn't finish. And look, Baltimore has, in terms of them in their playoff losses, their falls from grace, if you want to call it that, they've played a very big part in that, where, yes, the other team beat them, but they either didn't execute well, didn't coach well, the scheme was bad, untimely turnovers or, bad plays in bad spots. Like the Ravens have, honestly, they kind of did deserve with their performances to finish where they finished, but the Ravens are tired of that. And, it's kind of the notion of, well, how many revenge tours does this team need? The messaging was that the Buffalo loss lit a fire under them. And it's like, okay, how many fires do you need lit under you as well? But look, only one team can win a Super Bowl every season. The Ravens arguably should have 3 in the Lamar Jackson era, and they have 0. Not only do they have no Super Bowl wins, they have no Super Bowl appearances. And, some of these teams have just been far too talented to finish the way that they have. But, you have guys who are committed to winning, who want to win badly. And it does set a tone where guys show up. And look, if guys didn't show up, if they maybe had 10 absences, 12 absences, I still think that showing up send a message, but you can tell just like how connected this team is, how locked in this team is. And to me, that does make a big impact. Now, does OTA attendance decide whether the Ravens win or lose a Super Bowl? I don't think so. But every rep does count in that regard. So I'm excited about the messaging. We'll see what the days of OTAs brings in week 2. But, you had a lot of positive reviews. I mean, you look at Ryan Mink's article over at BaltimoreRavens.com. He did a great job kind of summarizing what he saw during the OTAs last week. And he talked about how Lamar Jackson was really strong. Jonas Schaefer of the Baltimore Banner, unofficially, Lamar went 10 of 11 on the day. Ryan saying that Lamar was really sharp. DeAndre Hopkins made a really strong first impression, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes here on this show. Ryan talked about Keaton Mitchell having burst. Bill Braid is making a early audition for taking over that Ardarius Washington spot. Trenton Simpson, Malaki Starks, people raved about Mike Green. Like, these guys are getting reps in, and it's valuable to be there. It's not the be all end all, but I think it is valuable to be there. And the messaging to me, it's indicative of a team that understands the goal and all is working towards it. Like, everybody is hyper focused on that goal, which is a good thing in my opinion. So coming up in the final part of the show, we'll talk a little bit about body transformation season for this Baltimore Ravens team, as well as get into some other Ravens news and notes. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot coming your way on the show. Back on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher here with you. It is Monday. We are riding along here on Locked On Ravens. We still have 4 more episodes to go this week after today. We had a great week last week, recapping days of OTAs, talking about the biggest storylines. We had a drama-filled episode on Friday. We talked about Falcons rookie taking a shot at Lamar Jackson. Marlon Humphrey cleared up some Bengals drama. So be sure to go check out our past episodes as well if you want all of the latest Ravens news. And be sure to keep it here on Locked On Ravens for all everyday daily updates here on the Baltimore Ravens 5 days per week. Hit that like and subscribe button in video form and follow along in audio form as well. Now, the body transformation season, it is strong for the Baltimore Ravens. Odafe always spoke to the media, said he put on 20 pounds and said that he's hopeful that it will help him in his game, both as a pass rusher and as a run defender. Owe coming off of a 10-sack season last year, double digits for the first time in his career, and it's a contract year for Odafe, where he can really cash in and make some big money if he has the Nnamdi Madubuike type leap. That's something that is potentially on the table for him. I know the thing with Owe is honestly trying to find more consistency, where he will absolutely ball out in a game. He had 3 sacks against the Steelers in that one game last season, but then he'll kind of disappear for like 3 weeks or a month. And you're wondering, all right, well, where's the Odafe Oweh we just saw? Where'd that go? And then he'll pop back up, and then he'll kind of go back in hiding. So the big thing for me, the talent is not the issue with Odafe Oweh, right? I am, if you've been listening to me on this show, I'm a big Oweh guy. But the thing that I've always said with him is the talent is there, but the consistency, if he can flash that talent more consistently, I think it will have a bigger impact overall, right? That's the big thing. Or even if, Oweh didn't have those 3 sacks against Pittsburgh and he had 1 against Pittsburgh, but then he was able to get those other 2 sacks in other games, like it's still the same stats, but I think it makes more of an impact instead of, okay, he's a huge game wrecker in 1 game and then disappears for 4 weeks, right? That to me is not what you want. But you also hear Mark Andrews talk about Derrick Henry helping him with his offseason workout routine. We've heard routinely on this show, from former Ravens receiver Qadry Ismail and, guys who were covering the team even daily at the facility, like a Jeff Rebeck at The Athletic. Like Derrick Henry has made such a profound impact on the field, obviously on it, we know that, but off of it, it has been incredible to hear the stories of how he has transformed a lot of the culture in terms of the focus and the energy and the leadership that he brings to the table. And you obviously can see that with Mark's answer, but just, getting guys on top of things, taking care of their bodies and giving, I guess, these guys understanding, which is great. I know people were kind of talking about Nate Wiggins. Oh, did he put on more muscle? What's his playing weight now? We talked with Q about that when he was on last week, and he said he didn't notice too much of a difference with Nate, but that's not a bad thing. And Q echoed the same sentiment there. It's like, we saw Nate dominate at his playing weight. And yeah, he could maybe stand to add a few pounds, but, didn't really bother him last season. I honestly expected Nate to kind of go through a lot more ups and downs than he did. I expected him to be really good, but, I thought that he was going to have more rookie moments. And while he certainly did have a few, he picked up the game like boom, like pretty much right away. I think that Cowboys game, he had a couple of rookie moments that then had a huge fumble that he forced on CeeDee Lamb. He was great. And so I know that coming out of the draft last season for Nate, I had talked a lot about, once we got to this point, which was his first full NFL offseason, I was expecting him to add some playing weight to him. But, my expectation for that, I'm not saying it's all gone. Maybe a few pounds would be great, but I trust Nate. Even if it is body weight from last season, his playing weight from last season. So that's a big thing. DeAndre Hopkins looked good, as we talked about in the second part of the show. And, he's looking spry apparently. And we had Q on the show, Qadry Ismail, who was at OTAs covering it. He got a look with his own eyes, and he talked about DeAndre Hopkins and kind of what he saw. So I want to play a clip from our show on Thursday of Q talking about DeAndre Hopkins and what he saw from him, because I think it is really intriguing in terms of the comparison he makes for DeAndre. What about D-Hop, Q? Your first impressions of D-Hop in a Ravens uniform, what were they?
So obviously the hype video, you saw the catch radius, but then you see it up close and personal. It reminded me of Odell Beckham Jr. when he got to the Ravens. He was a huge catch radius guy and, just could make plays. And I think D-Hop had that kind of ability as well. Went down and caught some low balls that, was really just good and strong, solid, had some toe top on the sideline type catches. John Harbaugh was mentioning that, he was blocking down, the field. Even I think Isaiah Likely was talking about that during 7-on-7. Here's a guy that's not necessarily resting on his laurels. Sure, he's on the downside of his career, but I think from a Nelson Aguilar upgrade, yeah, I think he is certainly, an upgrade, if you will, from what Nelly brings to the table. And Nelly, I have the highest amount of respect for as well.
I think Q and I are pretty much in agreement on the whole situation there, where I think he is an upgrade from Nelson Aguilar, and that's not diminishing what Nelson did over his 2 years in Baltimore. He was awesome in 2023, took a bit of a step back last season, but regardless, Nelson Aguilar provided a lot. In fact, a lot more than a lot of people, including myself, thought he would with the team. But with Odell, it's kind of the veteran pedigree. Like, obviously, Odell is more of that. He has like celebrity power, and that's something a lot of people were talking about with Odell coming in. And it's like, okay, how good of a player still is he? And look, I think the difference between Odell and DeAndre is that Odell's contract was $15 million for one season, which everybody knew was an overpay. It was a necessary overpay because Lamar clearly communicated he wanted one of DeAndre or Odell, and the Ravens made it happen for him, right? Keep the quarterback happy. Everybody understands that. But I think that DeAndre has the opportunity to be the best out of the three of them, meaning Odell, Nelson Aguilar, and himself. And I think that there's a possibility that it works out where he is much better than the two of them. Honestly, can maybe be better than the two of them combined. And that might be a little bit of a bold statement, but I do think a lesser role makes it feel or seem like, oh, DeAndre is on the downswing of his career. And look, DeAndre is no Houston Texans prime DeAndre Hopkins, right? I've said that. But with him managing his snaps maybe a little more, playing behind a Zay Flowers and Rashod Bateman, obviously having the threat of a Derrick Henry. You got Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. DeAndre Hopkins, even though his Chiefs tenure was really weird and they had weapons on that unit, DeAndre was on some good Texans teams, but I don't think DeAndre's ever been a part of an offense like this, if we're being honest. And so it's like, okay, you got to pay attention to all those guys I just mentioned. Well, what about DeAndre Hopkins, who, again, if you keep him in a limited role and I don't want to say situational, like he should be playing a decent amount of snaps here, but injuries have been an issue for DeAndre over the last handful of seasons. And if you can keep him healthy and keep him fresh into December, January, hopefully February, right? It's kind of, you have so much talent on really all facets of your roster. You should be able to rotate guys in a majority of your positions, wide receiver included. So, I'm really excited about what Q said there. The catch radius jump ball type deal is something that Baltimore's needed on this team for a while now. Not that guys like Zay and Rashod can't go up and get it, but DeAndre obviously brings more of that veteran presence there. And look, I understand his Odell comparison. I do. It feels like the same type of signing, but I think when it's all said and done, we'll talk about DeAndre as the best out of the three of Odell, Nelson Aguilar, and DeAndre Hopkins. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thanks so much for tuning in to the show. We'll be back here tomorrow talking more Ravens football as we always do. So be sure on the way out, hit the like and subscribe button in video form, follow along in audio form, and subscribe over there too. And I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.